We are live on YouTube and LinkedIn, and our topic today is climate and energy policy changes in the US. With us, the great Steve Gottenham. You can see some specs about him in the card. Executive Director of Science Coalition of America, author of some books, and one of the books with more than 100,000 copies in print. Welcome, Steve.
Armando, great to join you again.
Thank you. Steve, ask me to share each of the slides you sent to me. So
yes,
I want. But let's start, Steve, talking a little bit about the new government. Donald Trump's coming and very strong, and has been closing some climate-related federal agencies. Only in 1 month, he did some of the things. How do you see this movement?
It's amazing. I mean, it's beyond my expectations. It's beyond what he promised in the campaign. But he signed a whole bunch of executive orders his first day in office, which are orders that the president makes to the executive branch. Many of them were about climate, and many were big ones. So the biggest areas are withdrawing from international climate agreements. Second, cutting climate staff throughout the federal government. And the third, rescinding the endangerment finding, which we can talk about.
But do you see that those agencies were totally, let's see, unusual, not useful? I mean, so they lived, the country lived with these agencies for a long time without interest, without results.
Well, that's true. There's a combination of, he's cutting a whole bunch of people at different agencies, and we've had decades and decades of building up of the federal bureaucracy in the United States, both Republican and Democrat governments, and we have many people that we probably don't need, and they weren't coming into work. They were working from home and a lot of other things. But beyond that, really big changes to climate. The first chart you can put up, your viewers have seen before. He has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accords again.
Again, because it's not the first time?
It's not the first time. The Paris Climate Agreement was signed by more than 180 nations in 2016. It's a United Nations initiative, and it said basically that your nation would, like with all the other nations, would work to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and would put money toward doing that across the world. He withdrew in his first term, which was 2016 to 2020. President Biden restored our position in the Paris Agreement. And then on his first day back in office, Mr. Trump has withdrawn again. And then beyond that, second slide is he's cutting all this money that's going to the international climate efforts. First, the monies that go toward the Paris climate work and the United Nations, $4 billion a year, he has stopped those payments. But second, there's a group called the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, and he's basically closing that down. And that was providing another $3 billion a year for climate. So the total that the U.S. is cutting off is about 10% of the global climate money every year. It's really a huge thing.
Yeah. But this agency, specifically one, USAID, what this agency did in the past? What was the role of this agency?
Well, they were sending all kinds of money to things that most of the U.S. people, I don't think, wanted. But there was also a lot of money going to things like wind and solar overseas and in various nations. And he's decided he's just not going to support that anymore. So just a big shift, a saving of U.S. taxpayer money, but really impacting the climate programs around the world.
Great. The environmental agency, there is an environmental agency, strong one in the United States, recommended to reverse to 2009 CO2 level. are there risks to suffocate the planet with these decisions?
Yeah, so let's go down about 4 slides.
Sure.
You keep going.
One
Another.
more.
Okay, yeah. So you mentioned the 2009 endangerment finding. On December 7th, 2009, the EPA ruled that greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, endangered the health and welfare of the citizens of the United States. and I call this December 7th decision, I call it a date that will live in infamy, like other U.S. people have called about the Pearl Harbor, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th. But this endangerment finding, his first day in office, Mr. Trump asked Lee Zeldin, the new EPA administrator head, to look at this ruling and see if it needed to be changed. And a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Zeldin said back that, yeah, it does need to be taken away. And this is the basis for all of the greenhouse gas controls, emissions laws in the United States, in the federal government and many of the state governments.
Mm-hmm.
So Mr. Trump wants to roll this back. This is going to be in court battles for a year probably, and I expect the Supreme Court will eventually rule on this. But this would really have a big impact on the U.S. climate change policy.
Let me remove let me do something, because today I saw the speech of the Secretary of State, United States for Energy.
Okay.
He talked about LNG return, exports, LNG return in the CERA week, I suppose, and some other news. But there is a point that paid my attention, because he didn't accept in any case CO2 or green gases. What's the meaning of this concept that there is no acceptance for CO2, let's say, emissions? It's not a problem for the planet. Is it correct?
Yeah, so let's go down to the next slide or so.
Sure.
So a couple of years ago, the United Nations said we're in the age of global boiling. And you hear this all the time from the headlines. It's really warm. It's terribly warm. We've got all these problems. But when you actually look at the geological data, that is not the case. There are literally, I could post many cases where the data shows that in the last 10,000 years, we've had many times that were warmer than today. And these were multi-century long periods of time. Today's temperatures are not abnormally warm, despite what you might hear in Brazil press or international press. I'll go down to the next slide.
Sure.
An example is the Rhone Glacier in Switzerland. This is a mountain. This is an image of it here. This is a mountainside to mountainside glacier. And the Rhone River flows out of this. It flows into France and down to the Mediterranean, if any of your folks have been there, the viewers. And this glacier's been pulling back for more than a century. It's shrinking. But every time it pulls back, they find things under it like horse bridles, and they find wagon wheels, and they find wood that's 4,000 years old. And scientists have pointed out that this valley has been ice-free for most of the last 10,000 years, and today we have a glacier in it. Just one piece of evidence that it's naturally warmer in the past than it is today. And so all this hype is really misplaced. Mm-hmm. Next slide.
Sure.
So you're right. Energy Secretary Chris Wright doesn't accept the theory of man-made warming. He doesn't accept the idea that carbon dioxide is a pollutant. You and I and every person on Earth breathes out every single day about 2 pounds of carbon dioxide. It's what we exhale. We produce it in our bodies when we eat food. And there are 3 substances on Earth that are essential for life. And those are water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. Matter of fact, carbon dioxide is green. This is a graph of the world's top 7 food crops: corn, potatoes, wheat, sugarcane, rice, soybeans, and sugar beets, which all grow between 20 and 60% bigger with higher levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide. And there are literally hundreds of peer-reviewed studies that show that this is the case. Plants get bigger fruits, they get bigger vegetables, they get thicker tree trunks, they get bigger root systems, they're more resistant to drought, literally, if there's one compound we could put into the environment that is great for the biosphere, carbon dioxide is that compound. Yet today we have they're telling every industry and every university to cut carbon dioxide emissions. This is the biggest superstition of modern history. If you go down one more slide.
Sure.
This references my book, Green Breakdown, a little bit. I talk about a data that was put together by scientists in Australia who are using satellite data, and they have determined that global foliage is getting thicker. We've had about an 11% increase in foliage. We've had some desert areas that are now growing plants over about 30 years, and they attribute this to more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this is actually great for the planet. Yet today we're trying to do all these things to try and eliminate it. Just very, very foolish.
This statement that CO2 is green is impressive.
It is. You know, I often ask I often ask the question when I present to groups: what do cannabis growers know that the EPA doesn't know? And the answer: the cannabis grower knows that carbon dioxide is plant food. And literally, if you're growing marijuana and you know what you're doing, you're pumping carbon dioxide into your greenhouse to make the plants grow bigger and faster. And they're all doing this. And CO2 is green, and that's what we should be thinking about. We should be reducing real pollution, which is carbon monoxide, lead, ozone, particulates, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide going into the atmosphere, cleaning up our water, taking plastic out of the oceans. But let's get off this idea about carbon dioxide. That's just flat out wrong.
Interesting point, this one, too, that there are so many more problems that you need to solve instead of focusing on CO2. Yes.
Yeah. I was actually listening to a presentation from Chris Wright, and he was talking about how around the world we have half of the people in the world are burning wood in their residence for fuel. They don't have modern fuels, and wood gives off particles, much more than coal either, for the energy, even that the energy you get, and is creating disease around the world. I often talk about the lack of electricity around the world. We've had some folks like John Kerry who said we ought to stop all the coal-fired power plants globally. Well, that's about 35% of the world's electricity. There are 6,500 coal-fired power plants in the world today, and more than 1,000 are still in planning or being built. And yet we have about 700 million people that don't have access to electricity. And there are another 2 billion people that have blackouts or brownouts every day or every other day. So about a third of the world's people don't have enough electricity. Yet we have all these people saying we've got to shut down the coal plants. It's really very sad.
Imagine the face, the spirit of Fatih Birol today watching the Secretary of State talking. Was maybe fantastic. But tell me a point, Steve. It seems that Donald Trump wants to shut down green energy. So is the end of solar and wind energy, you see?
Well, he's doing some big changes. The first thing he did, again on January 20th, executive order, he halted all offshore leasing for wind turbines. In the United States, the federal government owns the land from 3 miles offshore out to 200 miles. And if you're going to put up wind turbines, you have to get a lease from the federal government. He just said, well, we're not going to lease any more of those. And immediately, all the stock prices of these wind companies just plunged. We had like 10 states on the East Coast that are planning to put in all this offshore wind. We have California and Oregon on the West Coast. That is all going to be shut down unless they already have a lease. And by the way, Mr. Trump told our new Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burgum, to go look at all those leases to see if some of them ought to be pulled back. So that's the first big change. Another one is in the area of electric vehicles.
It's a good point. Yeah. Tesla is the stocks are melting, and but
They are.
he bought a car today, Model Y. I don't know what.
He did. He had an interview with Elon Musk and bought a car. I think Tesla was really overpriced. It was at the start of the year. It was priced about 10 times as high as any other car company in the world compared to its sales, and so it was due to come down some. But yeah, we have a lot of people attacking Tesla dealerships in the United States. We've had people throwing Molotov cocktails at dealerships and doing all sorts of things. So he's really gotten kind of a negative image. But Mr. Trump, in his executive order unleashing American energy, talked about getting rid of the electric vehicle mandate, and that means all of the tax credits. We have a $7,500 tax credit in the United States for EVs. Getting rid of federal funding for electric vehicle charging stations, many other things. And so and by the way, we have 22 states with electric vehicle mandates today that say by something like the year 2035, you won't be able to sell a gasoline car anymore. The auto manufacturers would have to sell all electric vehicles. And so Mr. Trump is trying to roll that back as well. Just a big shift. And again, he just bought a Tesla. I don't think he's against EVs, but he's taken the right position, which is let's let the market decide. If you want to buy an electric vehicle, that's fine. But we shouldn't be subsidizing EVs, and we shouldn't be mandating that you can't buy a gasoline car anymore. Those aren't going to have any effect on storms. They're not going to have the slightest effect on ocean levels rising. So we need to go do that and let the market perform and get rid of all these subsidies. And that's what he's doing.
But Steve, electricity for cars or for logistics are concentrated on light cars, light vehicles at this time.
Yeah.
The heavy ones cannot be replaced yet. Is it correct or?
Yeah, that's right. The California had a heavy truck mandate that they were trying to put forward. They have withdrawn that, by the way, because, it's a long story, but California, when they put in a pollution requirement, they have to get a waiver from the federal government because the federal government is determined in the 1970 Clean Air Act to be the agency that took care of pollution. But they granted waivers to California for existing laws in the past. Well, up until the last few years, California keeps getting these waivers and they keep putting in their laws. But now Trump's new EPA, Lee Zeldin, is not going to grant waivers anymore to California. And so they've withdrawn that electric truck mandate. But these trucks are, they set up a new one in California with 30 charging stations. And if you put an electric truck at every charging station, you would use as much electricity as a city of 200,000 people, like San Bernardino. So there just isn't the electricity to turn all the trucks electric in any case. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of problems with that. But this is just another area that the federal government is rolling back.
Yeah, but Steve, there are two different topics and visions. One, the energy sources, wind, solar, and natural gas, and so coal. Yeah. And the other one is in the application side that we're talking exactly now in terms of vehicles and EVs and so. But both things are part of European vision. For instance, they love these two sides of the things, and Americans are going against these two sides. Is it correct?
Well, we've seen actually a slowdown in EVs, for example, in both. Yeah, it's a mixed bag. You're right. There's the generation side, wind and solar, and coal and natural gas and nuclear, and then there's the use side with EVs and electric appliances and all those sort of things. But we see a lot of this. We see a shift going on. I just wrote an article and got it published saying that towns and states don't want the green revolution. And we're seeing a lot of states that are pushing back right now. It's very hard to get, for example, local towns to allow a solar or a wind system to come in. And there's a lot of issues at the state legislatures that are trying to ban wind and solar. So we have a lot of things going on that are pushing back against this because, as I think we've discussed before on your show, wind and solar use about 100 times the land area of a
that's
coal, a gas, or a nuclear plant. And not only that, they're scattered all over the area. To get the same average power, you have to take these wide systems, and then you have to build all these transmission towers and run lines everywhere. And people don't like that either. So transmission is a problem. But so we have problems. We have problems both on the generation side in the U.S. and on the consumer acceptance side.
In all supply chain, there are problems in all supply chain. But tell me, there still have subsidies for fossil fuels, and I suppose they are higher than for renewables. Is it correct? Or
well, I hear that, but then you sort of look at it and you say, what subsidy? And they're really talking about they're talking about allowing to do a tax deduction for exploration and for other sorts of things. It's really not a subsidy. Now, in some nations, there are subsidies across the world. And I think those can be very high because we have nations producing oil and gas and they're subsidizing them. But in the United States, it's mostly a tax break. It is with wind and solar also. But as I've said in a couple of my first books, there are charts that show that on a per energy unit basis, the subsidy for solar and the subsidy for wind is 20, 30, 40, 50 times higher on a per unit of energy than for oil and gas. So that's really the way you need to look at it. You need to look at the energy produced and the size of the subsidy, and it's much, much higher for renewables.
You said in one of your texts that renewable energy failure, this expression, but maybe not failure to zero, maybe to a small percent of the total. How do you see this?
I think we're going to have a mixed future. What I mean really is the idea that we can go net zero by 2050 is a failure, a complete conversion to wind, solar, and biofuels from coal, oil, and natural gas. I mean, if you look at the industries, for example, if you look at fertilizer, if you look at cement, steel, chemicals, all of these things use a lot of natural gas, not only for fuel, but for feedstock. And converting those to renewables is just going to be an impossible task. Green hydrogen is very, very expensive. The biofuels are very, very expensive. That's not going to happen. We're going to have a mixed future. I think EVs are going to get better and better, and people are going to adopt them. But again, all of this stuff is not going to have a measurable effect on the climate. Climate is dominated by nature, not human emissions. Every day, nature puts 20 times more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as all of Earth's industries.
Good point.
And water vapor is Earth's biggest greenhouse gas, much bigger than even carbon dioxide. So I think part of this is people are going to realize that the theory is wrong over the next 20 or 30 years, and they're going to go back to sensible energy policy.
Steve, before we go to your remarks about your books and the contents of them, let me ask you about multilateralism and versus one-to-one negotiations. Do you support tariffs like Trump is imposing to Canada and to other countries?
Well, tariffs are kind of a mixed bag, I think. I was taught in school that tariffs are not good for economies, but he tends to use them as a leveraging kind of thing, so he can bargain. And I'm not really sure about the tariff situation across the world. I know that, for example, China puts a lot of tariffs on our goods, that sort of thing, but I don't really know Mexico real well. I don't really know Canada real well. So it's tough for me to comment on that. So I probably ought to stay out of the tariff area, but it certainly is a big area of controversy right now across the world. And we'll just see how it works out.
Because if Europe impose tariffs for LNG, American LNG, Qatar and Norway will be stronger in terms of exports to.
Well, they will, but I think Europe's still going to have to use U.S. gas because Qatar can't produce as much, and Europe has decided about 20 years ago that they would not do any hydraulic fracturing. Sometimes I show charts that shows Europe is filled with shale. There are shale fields all over Europe, something like 40 big shale fields. Northern Europe, from the Baltic states going west all the way to England, is one big shale field, and they all contain oil and gas in those shale fields. But Europe has decided they're not going to fracture any of that. And so they are dependent upon natural gas from Qatar and from the United States. They've cut it off from Russia. So, putting a tariff on that natural gas would just mean much higher prices for the people in Europe because they need that gas.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Tell me about your books, please. And is there any new book in being prepared, or is it still secret?
Well, I've written 4, and I still need an idea for a new one. But the latest is Green Breakdown: The Coming Renewable Energy Failure, which came out last year, and it talks about the efforts to go to net zero, this complete energy transition, and why they're going to fail. And so it talks about power plants and home appliances, electric vehicles. Talks about green hydrogen and carbon dioxide. Talks about heavy industry and transportation. Points out why these things aren't going to work. And by the way, it's got a whole bunch of color sidebars. My books, like the Mad Men Mad World of Climatism and Green Breakdown, have color sidebars with all the crazy headlines that are going on around the world. And pop up the next screen, if you will, or the last screen. Can you go all the way down?
Yeah, sure. Is there one? No.
Go all the way down to the last, all the way down. Keep going there.
One more. So this is one of the sidebars. There was a headline in the Miami New Times saying global warming makes couples cheat, says a dating website. And so this is just another one of the crazy things. We have stuff about don't take a shower in England to save energy, or mate with short people to help stop the climate change. There's just a crazy amount of things. So my books capture these, and they're a lot of fun to read, as well as giving the economics and the science. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very good. My last point, please. Do you see? I see this like I will try to explain. So the radicalism to exterminate with wind and solar, EVs, but in 4 years you can have a movement to the opposite of this with a new government, hypothetically.
We could.
So let's see a problem for this.
For 4 years, everything's on hold. We'll see what the next election is in the United States. But again, as I say, we have a lot of other things occurring. We have people pushing back across the states. They don't want wind and solar anymore by their farms. We have a real slowdown in electric vehicles in Europe and in the United States. In the U.S., EVs were only up 7% this last year. The rental company Hertz Rental got rid of all their electric vehicles. In Europe, we've had Europe EV sales are down 20-30% in Germany. So we see a lot of, we've kind of bumped up against the people that want to use electric vehicles and the ones that don't. So there are just a lot of issues that are coming. And by the way, this green hydrogen thing is going to crash. I read every day about bankruptcies for people trying to do green hydrogen. There's no company in the world that is making money on electric vehicle charging. You just can't make a profit because most people want to charge at home, so there's almost no business. Yet you need EV chargers for people to go long distances. So there are just more and more problems showing up. Mr. Trump is a big impact in the U.S. right now, but I think we're going to see a slow decline in this, and we're going to get back to sensible energy policy.
Interesting. An average view and accommodating some different views. Yeah, interesting. Thank you so much, Steve Gordonham, author of the book Green Breakdown. Thank you for coming. It was a great pleasure for me.
Thank you, Armando. Until the next time.
Next time, too. Bye-bye.